Okay.
Mr. Cashin refers to the internet URL or URL, bonniecrombie.ca. bonniecrombie.ca is personal property of Bonnie Crombie. She used it first in her nomination campaign, seeking federal office. It was hers. It was then utilized in the election campaigns, as a candidate certainly can utilize her personal property.
Okay, so what we're going to do now is just repeat what he said here about bonniecrombie.ca.
bonniecrombie.ca is personal property of Bonnie Crombie.
We'll check out bonniecrombie.ca. We go to Domain Tools. And down here for ownership and stuff, we'll go in with bonniecrombie.ca. And there it is. Arrow Communication Group, Inc. owns about 4 other domains, and it looks like that it also owns bonniecrombie.ca. And when you look here, it says the creation date was February 28th, 2007, and it was updated April the 13th, 2011. Looks like that was the registrar. That's the registrant's name, Arrow Communications Group, Inc. And the administrative contact was a guy named Marcel Weider, or Weider. Technical contact and administrative contact. There's the email. And Arrow Communications Group, who seems to own this domain, or at least registered it, also has 4 other domains up here. Let's go back to what Mr. Siegel here says.
bonniecrombie.ca is personal property of Bonnie Crombie.
Arrow Communications Group, and it will expire on February 28th, 2012. Ooh, that means right now that it's only got 2 weeks to go before they will re-register it. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens here. Are they going to make it look more like Bonnie Crombie owns it and try to flush out that it's Arrow Communications Group, which is actually, well, I'll show you what Arrow Communications Group is in a second. But we are introduced to an interesting person, Marcel Weider. Who is he? And so what I did, this was yesterday, was I went here to Google and typed in Marcel Weider, and right away, can you see up there, got Arrow Communications, and it's one of the first ones. Let's put this up higher, bigger, so that you can see. It says, the dirty tricks man, Toronto-born Marcel Weider, is revealed. And I thought, okay, let's check on that. And this is what we find. It's a Globe and Mail article. And I'm actually going to read this. Who is Bonnie Crombie associated with? The bonniecrombie.ca, this Arrow Communications Group, Marcel Weider. You know, you're judged by the people you hang around with or your associates. So, Globe and Mail, August 7th, 1999. And it says, unfriendly persuasion. And let's go in a little bit here, because I want you to read along with me. The dirty tricks man, Toronto-born Marcel Weider, is revealed as the mind behind recent controversial political campaigns in Ontario. Is he depressed? Nah. And the caption, take a look at the face, caption, Marcel Weider said, and this is a quote, I don't consider it underhanded. I bring issues to the attention of the voters. I let the voters ultimately judge. Okay, so let's read the story. Marcel Weider, who brought stealth politics to Toronto's first megacity election and ethnic crime imagery to the latest Ontario vote, is having breakfast at McDonald's and talking about life as a political gun for hire. At 38, he has worked for federal, provincial, and municipal candidates and been unmasked in one of the most elaborate dirty tricks campaigns in Canadian history. So, this Marcel Weider is behind bonniecrombie.ca. He hasn't let it get him down. Quote, that chapter, as far as I'm concerned, is closed and I'm moving forward. That reminds me of when Bonnie Crombie's asked about her husband and the BioVale fiasco. It's that we've put that behind us. It's time to move forward. That seems to be the kind of attitude this guy has, too. Let's go on. Because it's really important, the kind of people behind Bonnie Crombie. There are things he still won't discuss. Brackets, his lawyer is at the table to make sure. But he does not hide his scorn for the conventional campaign leaflet, the kind bearing a politician's picture, a party logo, and, quote, a lot of copy about different issues, sort of like the old kitchen sink approach. Or in other words, informing the public. And here's something really worrisome, because there are a lot of people I see right now who are trying to turn Canada into the United States. So, what it says about Weider: a student of U.S. political techniques, he looks for other ways to grab voters' attention and, quote, get them to think for a split second that, hey, maybe there's something I should be paying attention to. Asked if this involves underhanded efforts to make opponents look bad, he says, quote, I don't consider it underhanded. I bring issues to the attention of the voters. I let the voters ultimately judge. Mr. Weider, who works out of a 2-bedroom Toronto apartment, represents a new trend in Canadian politics, or would like to. His is the mind behind a leaflet titled, How Much Does It Cost to Buy a City Councillor? Distributed in the name of Citizens for Decency in Politics, a fictitious organization just before the 1997 municipal election. It suggested that former Toronto budget chief David Hutchin was open to bribery. Next, a trans-border telephone blitz by an Alabama firm whose employees claimed to represent pollster Argus Reid, another Weider invention. The callers asked Toronto residents whether they would be likely to vote for Mr. Hutchin if they knew he had received illegal campaign contributions. Mr. Hutchin did not win a seat on the amalgamated council. Next, a subway poster produced for the Toronto Police Association this spring, now remember that was 1999, featuring what turns out to be a 1991 photo of 5 members of a Latino street gang in Culver City, California. The caption, there's only one thing that these guys fear, your vote. I remember that kerfuffle. The poster urged people to send law and order candidates to the provincial legislation, implicitly supporting Premier Mike Harris and his Conservatives. The police union endorsed no Liberals or New Democrats. Mr. Weider has worked most often for Liberals, but does not play favorites. And over here is the sample of the of Weider's for sale thing. How much does it cost to buy a city councillor? And we're going to continue here. Unlike the leaflet and the phone calls, the poster involved no deception, except to the extent that people who watch too much American television might think it showed criminals they are likely to meet in Toronto, where Hispanics do not loom large on the gang scene. The fact that it was Mr. Weider's handiwork came to light only recently. Union President Craig Bromwell, who for weeks ignored Globe calls about the consultant, confirmed that Mr. Weider is an inner circle advising the union executive on election campaigns. Mr. Bromwell said he's not worried about Mr. Weider's past. Quote, anytime there's an election, we're going to use him again, if that answers your question. Mr. Weider declines to discuss his work for the union, citing client confidentiality and what he calls an outside chance of hate crime charges arising from the poster, which alarmed Hispanic groups. He talks instead about his philosophy of persuasion. Persuasion, he calls it. So, Bonnie Crombie, Alex Weeder. And let's go up here. And he says, what I try to do is cut through the clutter of competing messages with a strong, focused approach. Any good advertising tries to do that, and I think campaigns are starting to mature in the same way as the ad industry. This is American politics. As Mr. Weeder tells it, he got his taste for politics as a student president at Ledbury Park Junior High in North York, just beyond the former Toronto boundary, and as a teenage canvasser for Liberal fixture Mitchell Sharp in the old federal Eglinton riding. A young Liberal in his University of Toronto days, he went on to do campaign work for such figures as Francis Nunziata, now a Toronto councillor, former MPP Tim Murphy, now president of the Ontario Liberal Party, and Art Eggleton, now defense minister. Increasingly, he drew inspiration from south of the border, frequenting seminars organized by Campaigns and Elections, a monthly magazine for U.S. political professionals, and eventually becoming a speaker at the seminars. The work was unpaid, but not without reward. The magazine hailed him last year as one of 69 rising stars of politics. Although its research appears to have been less than exhaustive, it described him as president of Polycom, one of Canada's leading political consulting firms. North of the border, Polycom is such a well-kept secret that it lacks even a telephone directory listing. According to Mr. Weeder, it is a division of Aero Communications, the company he runs from his apartment. So I would suggest that Polycom is a, what's the other thing that he made up? Citizens for Decency in Politics. When it comes to importing U.S. political styles, he is not alone. Former BC Premier Mike Harcourt, a New Democrat, used Washington-based Democratic image maker Carl Struble. Ontario's Mike Harris owes his latest victory in part to Mike Murphy, a Republican attack ad specialist who revels in the pejoratively true. Citizens are supposed to be informed, and it's clearly here that they're tricked, they're deceived, fictitious names made, and then they have the nerve also to use something like, what is it? The fictitious Citizens for Decency in Politics. During the campaign this year, Mr. Murphy, who shuttled between an office outside Washington and Harris headquarters in Toronto, helped to create unflattering portrayals of Liberal Dalton McGuinty, dismissed endlessly in Tory commercials as just not up to the job. Mr. Weeder says his U.S. exposure made him what he is. Quote, I remember being the only Canadian down there at some of these seminars and slowly built up relationships, learned more about the process, and became a better professional. Wow. In Canada, now quoting Weeder, you're going to see more and more professionals develop that specialize in elections. In the U.S., it's $1 billion a year industry. While we're not quite up to that number, it has been steadily inching its way upward. And then Michael Izzard, a Toronto lawyer and friend to the ex-councillor Hutchins, boast, I'm the guy who found out who Weeder was. As he tells it, he strolled into the work area of a Toronto postal station one morning near the end of the 1997 campaign and persuaded employees to let him see the paperwork that went with a bulk political mailing. Mr. Hutchins' office was getting calls from people who received the first of 21,000 copies of Mr. Weeder's Buy a City Councillor leaflet. Armed with the name of the distribution firm handling the mailing, Mr. Izzard traced it back to its source. He says Mr. Weeder might not have been caught had he paid full postage in cash rather than using a distributor to get a bulk rate. He outsmarted himself. And in the course of this video, you will see that Bonnie Crombie also uses a bulk distributor. That is, she doesn't quite use Canada Post, but something very much along the line of what Weeder does. Anyway, Mr. Weeder still refuses to say who paid him to do a number on Mr. Hutchin and why. But he has acknowledged formally that he wrote the leaflet and credited it to the imaginary citizens group. So in other words, the Citizens for Decency in Politics. He has further acknowledged that he hired the Alabama outfit to conduct the phone campaign following a script he wrote using the name Argus Reid, which sounds like a well-known polling firm, and that people, quote, may have mistakenly concluded that the poll was being conducted by Angus Reid Group Incorporated. He made the admissions in out-of-court settlements which Mr. Hutchin and Angus Reid, both of whom sued him. In the deal with Mr. Hutchin, he agreed to sign a public confession of his deeds and an apology stating that the suggestions of corruption were unfounded. He also agreed to pay the defeated politician $30,000 towards his legal costs. Now remember, that was 1999. Mr. Hutchin agreed to keep the financial part of the deal secret and to refrain from filing charges with the police or the Ontario Election Commission. That seemed to be the end of it, but it wasn't. Mr. Weeder now is suing Mr. Hutchin for $40,000 on grounds that he violated the deal. In response, Mr. Hutchin is again suing Mr. Weeder, asking $500,000 for defamation and $200,000 for loss of employment. Exactly what led to this situation is in dispute. What is clear is that Mr. Hutchin called a news conference in June of last year to publicize the apology, as he was entitled to do, and that he and his lawyer, Mr. Izzard, let slip that the settlement included money for legal costs. As Mr. Izzard recalled it, two strangers, one with a video camera, the other with a persistent line of questioning, showed up among the news crews, and the second man asked repeatedly, "Did you get any compensation? Did you get any money?" Until he and his client said yes. They did not reveal the figure. When the session ended, the strangers left hurriedly, and the regular crews packing up could not identify them, the lawyer said. He asserted in a statement of defense filed on Mr. Hutchin's behalf that Mr. Weeders specifically hired a film crew to be present at the press conference to specifically embarrass the defendants and to entrap them into making statements which could later be used as a basis of this action, but he offered no proof. At McDonald's, Mr. Weeder will not comment. His lawyer, Leonard Sussman, says, quote, any allegations of Mr. Hutchin being set up by Mr. Weeder, as stated in the pleadings, are incredible and categorically denied. Asked about his style, Mr. Weeder spoke in terms of marketing strategy, not political tricks, but allowed that his work has, quote, a definite style, unquote, that does not involve boring leaflets. Meaning does not involve information that citizens need to become informed voters. I try to see what are the salient issues for the voters and then design something that speaks directly to that. I try and minimize the amount of copy, and I prefer being more visual with photos that capture the voters' attention. And I will tell you this because of research that I've been doing into political consultants, political public relations people, that is a current theme, which is to hit people with something very quick, usually catchphrases or pictures. Forget about all of the issue-driven stuff. And then he says, remember, my competition is not so much my opponent as it is what else is going through that mailbox. The competition at the mailbox is the Hydro Bill, the Sports Illustrated magazine, the newspapers, the flyers, the pizza ads. I have to create something that will stand out among those different items. And I see that. But I'll leave you to decide. His most famous job had nothing to do with slick design. But he said he never again resorted to such tricks as attacking under cover of a fictitious organization. And last, over here, his foes tend to point out to unexplained happenings and say, "That's his handiwork," he said cheerfully. "I get blamed for a lot of things, and I'm sure people want to attribute everything they can to me. Urban myths develop very quickly in this business." And there you have the person who's registered bonniecrombie.ca. The dirty tricks man, Marcel Weeder, worked mostly for the Liberal Party, but will swing conservative if the money's right.
bonniecrombie.ca is personal property of Bonnie Crombie. She used it first in her nomination campaign, seeking federal office. It was hers. It was then utilized in the election campaigns, as a candidate certainly can utilize her personal property. In the municipal campaign, it wasn't even rewritten. All that was done was to place what is called by my client, and I've heard the phrase, whether it's technically correct, some of you may know better, a redirect or a hot link, so that when somebody went to bonniecrombie.ca, it actually flipped you right over to Vote Crombie.
I'm confirming that when you type in for bonniecrombie.ca, almost immediately, watch that. It right away redirects you to votecrombie.ca. Now we're going to listen to what the lawyer, Bonnie Crombie's lawyer, says about votecrombie.ca. Oh, and by the way, did you notice how the lawyer didn't mention Marcel Weeder at all? But now listen what Siegel says next.
Vote Crombie was established exclusively for the municipal campaign by a volunteer.
Vote Crombie was established exclusively for the municipal campaign. So let's now go to Vote Crombie. And Vote Crombie is right here. And we're going to go with votecrombie.ca and search for the domain. Now this site was established exclusively for the municipal campaign. And look when it was created. May 31st, 2011. So that means at the end of May, Bonnie Crombie already knew or had planned to run in the Ward 5 election. There it is. Vote Crombie was established exclusively for a municipal campaign on May 31st, 2011. And Crombie didn't go in and announce that she was running until August. And of course the other question is, who registered it by a volunteer? Was it again Marcel Weeder?
Vote Crombie was established exclusively for the municipal campaign by a volunteer. Not somebody who's in the business of doing this, so it did not need to be reported as an expense. The value of web hosting for a month, it was a contribution of valued at less than $100 by that volunteer, with no obligation that it be listed here. This is under the threshold.
And how do you come to the value of $100?
Typically, the web registration hosting costs for a month, in my experience, are for a non-commercial, non-elaborate website in the order of $25, $30 at the most. That's personal experience. I'm not really here to give evidence, but the notion that it is worth some large amount that has to be declared, would require evidence not from Mrs. Crombie, but from Mr. Cashin, and there's none before. Mr. Cashin kind of acknowledges that,
I probably just keep going.
and I prefer to wait and speak to the
Yeah,
board.
record them. It's your choice.
Okay, I'm sure you can make it quick. It might help me to just review and see if I think I'm coming to the end of the whole one. I'll make sure I take advantage of the time that way. Didn't want you to miss a thing.
Thank you.
The submission from Mr. Cashin, as I was starting to say, is actually predicated on speculation and acknowledges that he doesn't know, and has no evidence as to where the bonniecrombie.ca hurl comes from. He says if it was purchased by the federal EDA. Again, the obligation would be upon him to show that, not to speculate about it. That's not compelling evidence that is at all credible to say, well, maybe it was. An assumption cannot be credible information. Moving then to issue number 5. Unless you have questions about that.
You may have a question here, Mr. Mayor? More than Internet Council? I do, no. Mr. Council?
No.
Mr. Chuck? No. No.
Somewhere around there. No. There it is. No, that's, yeah. There's the complaint.
You're much bigger table.
Issue 5.
Issue 5.
Failure to disclose or underreporting the salaries, benefits, honorary, professional fees. Let's go through the same exercise we've gone through a couple of times now.